wide array of topics, including commentaries to Taoist and Neo-Confucian classics, inner-alchemical texts, litanies, monastic and lay liturgy, oral instructions, epigraphy, and more. While many of the texts included in it come from the previous Ming Dynasty Taoist canon, a third are new, and many of these were produced in the late Ming and Qing dynasty at spirit writing sessions at local altars across China. First compiled at the end of the 18th century, this compilation was republished and enlarged in the early 20th century. Quickly, the project of producing a companion to this compilation was initiated by Dr. Monica Esposito in 2006 and hosted by Kyoto University's Institute for Research in the Humanities. When Monica passed prematurely in 2011, Professor Lai Jiting of the Chinese University of Hong Kong took over the project and brought together an international team of editors to help him complete it. The Chinese version of the companion was published in May of 2021, 10 years after Monica's passing, and marked by an international virtual conference. There's a plan to also produce an English language publication if possible. Today, we invited an esteemed group of scholars to discuss this project. And these scholars were actively involved in the multi-year project of producing the companion. And we want them to speak about the long and complex process of editing it and about how this process changed their views of Qing Taoism. The editorial committee for the companion was divided into 3 teams, one English, one Chinese, and one Japanese. Some of these editors are speaking today, some are in the audience, and also in the audience are various other collaborators of this important project, and possibly we'll talk to them during the question and answer period. The schedule, you can see it on the screen. Professor Lai Jiting will start. And he will have 15 minutes. Professor Guo and Professor Li Yuanguo will have 10 minutes together. And then each other speaker will have 8 minutes. And then we'll have about a half hour of Q&A, and possibly we can stay on a little longer to discuss issues that we want to discuss. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming, the presenters as well as the attendees. I'll leave it up there, Liu, as you talk as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Liu Xun. 大家好，我叫刘迅，在那个罗特格斯大学任教。我把这个刚才那个Ellen 博士讲的那些话，我把它用中文的重述一遍。主要是这个要说明，就是这个道藏纪要是清代最基本的这个道教文献集成。其主题呢，涵括了道教以及新儒家的这些经典的那个诠释著作，有内丹的文本、道教公观以及这个儒家这个或者火居道士们的经文、善书，还有铭文等等。尽管其中许多文本都来自明代的那个道藏，其30%以上，就30%呢，都是新作，也就是从明代以来的一些新的这些新的一些作品。其中许多出自这个晚明以及清代各地鸾坛伏击的文本，最初与这个初级，就是这个纪要的这个初级呢，最初是在嘉庆年间，由这个在京师和江南地域的蒋玉甫，还有这个一群这个联系松散的朝廷官员们，还有学者们编辑而出版的。后来又在这个20世纪初呢，由成都的这个道教二仙庵主持，并这个增扩再版。莫妮卡博士早在2005年就发起了这个编辑道藏纪要提要的这个计划。最初的合作者包括了那个 Fabrizio Brigadio 博士，还有这个几位来自大陆的学者。今天他们就在场啊。设计最初呢是这个计划最初是设在由麦古邦夫教授领导的京都大学人文科学研究所内。2011年，那个莫妮卡这个博士不幸早夭之后不久呢，由这个香港中文大学的黎志天教授接手了该项计划，并扩充带入了一个国际化的这个编辑和合作者团队，以完成此计划。新的编辑委员会呢，是由亚洲、欧洲和北美的学者构成，并分为3组，分别负责 这个审阅和编辑这个英文、中文和日文3种文字写成的各种这个提要的文稿。道藏纪要提要的这个中文版呢，也就是在今年的5月份，在这个在这个病疫的这个高潮期间呢，就出版了，5月份出版了。这也是莫妮卡博士逝世10周年刚好10周年这个出版了，迎来这个出版。同时呢，这个在黎志天博士的领导下，还举办了一个专题的这个网络的国际讨论会，以资庆祝。我们也希望在不久的将来呢，出版这个英文版的这个道藏纪要的这个提要。参与这个有3组，这个这个参与的成员都很熟悉了。底下的部分，因为我想这个Alan 博士已经把这个放在网上了，我就不说了。好，我很期待各位的这个发言和讨论。
Okay, so we now ask Professor Lai to start the proceedings.
Okay. Dear friends and colleagues, good evening from Hong Kong time and good mornings for the US times. And I'm very thankful to Professor Valusi and also Professor Liu for organizing the roundtable to discuss about the publication of the Daozang Jiyao, the companion to the essentials of the Taoist canon at the Global Taoist Forum. And I hope this Global Forum will continue the momentum to study modern Taoism, especially of the Qing period. And as the chief editor of the companion, and I'm more than happy to take this good opportunity to share with you about the history of the project and also some key issues of studying the Daozang Jiyao. And as Elena mentions, Daozang Jiyao is the fundamental Taoist anthology of the Qing dynasty, which has been the object of an international research project since 2006, involving a highly qualified worldwide team of up to 74 Taoist scholars from various institutions all over the world. And the result of this research has been put for publication in May this year in the form of 314 articles compiled into 3 volumes of the companion. And 74 Taoist scholars write an article for each of the 314 texts of the Daozang Jiyao. Each text compiled in the Daozang Jiyao is the object of one article. And the aim of each article is to provide detailed and well-structured information about the Daozang Jiyao text, not only from the point of view of their textual history, but also we emphasize the content and the sources. And especially it's worthy to note that such information of the majority of the Daozang Jiyao text is not yet available and very important for future study of modern Taoism. And Professor Liu Xin and also Professor Valusi also mentions some initial formation background of the research project, firstly initiated by late Professor Monica Exposito in the year of 2006 at the Institute for Research in Humanities of Kyoto University in Japan, together with Professor Kunio Mukitani and also Professor Christian Witten. This project very soon received great support and participation of all over 60 Taoist scholars in the formation period. And also indeed from 2006 to 2007, just for first 2 years, the Kyoto University, Taiwan Jiang Jingguo Foundation, and also the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science have all provided funding for this research project. I think that all these funding organizations believe that the project will have a significant impact on the research of modern Taoist history in particular, and also Chinese religions in large. And in the following, I would like to mention my friendship with Monica and how Monica's invite me to join the project. And on April 2nd of 2009, Monica was invited to the Chinese University of Hong Kong and gave a lecture on the Daozang Jiyao project to the Center for Studies of Taoist Culture. And also later in the same year, she came to CHK again for the international conference organized by the center. And he submitted articles, the Daozang Jiyao project mutations of a canon, and which later published in the first issue of the journal Taoism, Religion, History and Society. And in January 2010, both of us attended a conference held in Hong Kong by Taoist College of Ching Sung Guan Taoist Association. And it was the first time that I received the invitation from Monica to co-direct the publication of the companion. And the team has decided to publish its Chinese version by the Chinese University of Hong Kong Press. And in early March 2011, I went to Kyoto to meet with Monica and also Professor Cuneo for the discussion of the received Chinese manuscripts. However, Monica has been suffering from heart disease at that time, but was still able to talk over the phone. After my short stay in Kyoto, I came back to Hong Kong. On March 10, Griffith's news came from Kyoto that Monica has unfortunately passed away because of heart attack. Next year, to avoid interruption of the progress of the research project, I went to Kyoto again to discuss in person with Professor Cuneo and also Professor Witten. And we finally received the agreement on the collaboration of this project. Our consensus was that on the first hand, in terms of the Chinese version transcription and manuscripts, editorial work of the Daozang Jiyao will be, the editorial work of the Daozang Jiyao will be taken up by the center in Hong Kong. But for e-version, digitization work of the Daozang Jiyao will continue maintained and conducted by the institutes. So from then on, I have taken up the leading role of this companion publication project. And as all of you received the news about the formation of the editorial committee to sustain the project. So an international committee was set up. They include Professor Mugatani, Professor Kim Ji-Shen, Professor Mori Yoria, Professor Vincent Gossat, Professor Liu Xun, Professor Paul Cat, and also Professor Elena Valusi, and also Professor Wang Zhongyu. Okay, so this is some brief background of the history and also the progress of the projects. Initially start up at Kyoto, and then later taken up by the Chinese University of Hong Kong. In the following, because my presentations is short, so I would move to the second part about the key issues or some difficulties of studying Daozang Jiyao. I think that I hope this sharing will inspire all of you to continue our discussions for the further study of Daozang Jiyao or modern Taoism in the future. And starting from the beginning, when I taught the projects, I immediately found a very important fact, which is the close relationship between the Jiaqing edition Daozang Jiyao and the Juan Tan, the Liu Zhu authors in Beijing. And especially before the combination of Daozang Jiyao, I found that another Liu Zhu anthologies was already compiled by Juan Tan under the editorial leadership of Zhang Yupu. And this Liu Zhu anthologies is called Liu Zhu Chuanshu Zhengzhong. So Liu Zhu Chuanshu Zhengzhong was the starting point of my study of the Daozang Jiyao. And in this, my paper on the Juan Tan and Chuanshu Zhengzhong has already been published in the Bulletin of the Institute of Chinese Literature and Philosophy in 2015. And it's very important for me to argue upon, which is that if we want to study Daozang Jiyao, we need to approach it from Liu Zhu Chuanshu Zhengzhong and find the close relationship between Liu Zhu Chuanshu Zhengzhong and Daozang Jiyao. And it is an undisputed fact that Zhang Yupu and Juan Tan disciples were called upon by Liu Zhu to join force in the combination of Daozang Jiyao. According to the prefix by one of immortals, Su Lao, saying that Juan Tan was commanded by Liu Zhu to continue the work of Liu Zhu Chuanshu Zhengzhong and expand the selection criteria of the scriptures and books from the Orthodox Liu Zhu lineage in their combination of Daozang Jiyao. And as we know that the finals, the text collected by Daozang Jiyao comprises 198 canonical texts and also 19 extra canonical writings. Indeed, the scale of Daozang Jiyao was very much larger, not just in terms of number, but also the subject it covers. But anyways, Daozang Jiyao was an extension of the disciples' continuous desire for the propagation of their cult and faith based on the basis of the completed Liu Zhu Chuanshu Zhengzhong. And I don't know how much time I still have, but in the followings, I just summarize 5 issues during the process of my studying. The first, who was the original compiler of Daozang Jiyao? And as early as 1906, when Yan Yongke, Pang Hanren, and Ko Longxiang compiled the Chonghan Daozang Jiyao, they deliberately attach a fake origin to Daozang Jiyao by falsely naming Pang Dingqiu as its compiler during Kangxi period. This false information is still used by many unsuspecting unsuspecting scholars and publishers in the field, as well as by provincial or university library catalogs in mainland China. I think this is one of the great achievements for the companion to state firmly that this false information cannot be sustained. We want to study Daozang Jiyao. And especially there's one article written by Sichuan's scholar Daozang. He seriously misjudges the Jiaqing edition of Daozang Jiyao and concludes that by the Jiaqing period, Zhang Yupo built on the Daozang Jiyao compiled by Pang Dingqiu and added 79 Taoist titles, which is not excluded from or newly published after the main Daozang. Okay, this is about the issues of the original compiler of Daozang Jiyao. Second, how many versions of the Jiaqing editions Daozang Jiyao in circulation, and how many Taoist texts were connected in Daozang Jiyao of Jiaqing edition? This is also a very difficult question. I spent a long time to tackle these issues, and also I think in my 100 pages introductions, I really want to solve this question for our future study of Daozang Jiyao. And indeed, I argue that the main reason behind this issue lies in the fact that many previous researchers have not made use of Jiaqing's Daozang Jiyao as an accurate textual resources, nor have they conducted an in-depth comparisons to identify the differences among the various versions of Daozang Jiyao. As a result, scholars are often citing sources that have miscalculated the numbers and thus reached wrong or incorrect conclusion. For example, one sources we often quote by Ong Dujian in his Daozang Zimu Yingde. Ong based his study entirely on the Chengdu Erxin An's reduction of Guangxue edition of Chonghan Daozang Jiyao without checking it against the Jiaqing edition's Daozang Jiyao, and therefore failed to accurately answer questions such as how many canonical and extra-canonical Taoist texts were newly added to the Jiaqing edition Daozang Jiyao and to the Guangxue edition's Chonghan Daozang Jiyao, respectively. So this is another issues that you will still rely on Ong Dujian's Daozang Zimu Yingde's then is very sorry that all we quote from him is incorrect. Okay. The third issues faced by researchers of Daozang Jiyao. Okay,
sorry to interrupt. No, if you could just wrap it up because we have another. Sorry about that. Excuse me.
It is very fast to finish. The first issues faced by research of Daozang Jiyao is that the numbers of Taoist texts connected in the books varied from version to version. And this is the difficulties that we have to I think we need to recognize. But the beginning of the combination of the Daozang Jiyao, these problems appears. And to make the problem worse, for example, the Zhongmu of the Daozang Jiyao within the many redaction of the Jiaqing edition of Daozang Jiyao may not match with the actual number of the Taoist text that particular redaction connected. So this confusion stemmed from the fact that a number of editorial digressions or revision may have taken place during the production of the different redactions of the Daozang Jiyao. I think all of our teams of the companions have already realized the fact that there were different revision of the Jiaqing Daozang Jiyao. Okay, the fourth difficulty is that it's very difficult to reach a consensus regarding the number of Taoist texts collected in Daozang Jiyao and Chongkan Daozang Jiyao. So this is also another issue that to build up the link between Daozang Jiyao and Chongkan Daozang Jiyao. And without this kind of research result, it's also very difficult to understand the intention and also the result of Chongkan Daozang Jiyao compiled in Guangxi, Chengdu area. Okay, the last issues I want to share with friends and colleagues in the round table is that indeed, after the combination of Daozang Jiyao, the record of the activities of Zhuan Tans ceased to exist, and we do not find any information about Zhang Yupu and Zhuan Tan. So if we want to put the link between the text and the context under our study of Daozang Jiyao, after the passing away of Zhang Yupu in 1919, so we cannot find any information about Zhuan Tan. So as Monica put it, quote, unfortunately, this great project did not bear the expected fruit. What was supposed to get recognized as the new Taoist canon of the Qing dynasty became, after Zhang Yupu's death, a rare text prized by collectors, instead by Taoist temples. So regarding the above 5 issues for scholars who want to study Daozang Jiyao, I do think that the companion, the publication of companions can help scholars to build a new platform, a new beginnings for future study of Daozang Jiyao and also the modern Taoism of Qing dynasty. Finally, the publication of the companion, I believe that will not only contribute to a better understanding of Taoism of the Qing period, but also will also shed the light on Chinese religions as well as the intellectual construction of Chinese culture during the Qing period, especially the historical transformations from Qing period to the modern and the contemporary China. And the publication of the companion undoubtedly will become one of the reference in the academic departments of Chinese religion, as Chinese studies, Chinese history, and others humanities in Chinese studies. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lai. This was a great and exhaustive introduction to the Daozang Jiyao and to the history of the Daozang Jiyao project. So we now move on to the next 2 presenters, Professor Guo Wu and Professor Li Yuanguo, who will discuss their involvement with the project. Guo Wu 老师, Li Yuanguo 老师。
请李彦国老师先讲吧。
哦，好。
李老师你先讲，如果时间不够我就不讲了，我就表示一个祝贺，向李志天教授、李志天老师。李老师你讲吧，如果时间留给我1-2分钟，我简单讲2句。听不见，得打开下面那个。
要打开，
解除静音。
可以，可以，
你听到了，
现在听到了吧？
听到了，
听到了，听到了，
看得到我不？
看得到，
看得到，
啊，看得到，那我就开始讲了。
看得到。
好，谢谢你们邀请我参加这样一个研讨会。我的记忆中呢，莫妮卡她做这个道藏纪要呢的研究是很早的，她这个项目正式开始是在2008年6月，而在2008年之前的前3年，2005年。我去日本访问，在京都大学参加了一个道教研讨会，麦古邦夫、莫妮卡教授都参加了，还有一些法国的人，法国的傅飞兰，他们都来参加了。在那个会上，他就给我提到了他有这样一个计划，那么他要争取得到京都大学麦古邦夫的帮助来做这个事儿。我当时觉得他做这个事儿难度是非常大的，难度是非常大的。但是呢，我凭我的那个学术的直觉，我觉得这是一个非常重要的一个研究项目，因此我就说，你如果做，只要需要我来支持你，我都会大力的支持你。所以说，他就到了2008年6月，他就专程到了成都，落实这个项目的进展。那么，他首先就希望我们能够把道藏纪要里面的所有的经典全部要非常规范的校注，这个工作是很难的。并且他工作做得非常细，校注的那个范列，他都完全都理得非常清楚。他希望我来组织承担，在中国组织一些中青年的这个研究人员来做这个工作。因为那个时候呢，大陆也已经在做中华道藏，但中华道藏的那个学术的质量确实不令人满意。他也知道，他就说我们一定要非常的规范，要做一个范本出来。好，我答应了，然后我就这样一个点教的工作呢，我就承担下来，然后就组织了大概一共组织了也不多，也就是几位，都是中青年人都是中青年人，让他们来点教，最后由我来把关嘛，最后我来审。这个工作前后后做了4年多5年，才把这个事儿就全部做完。在做这个工作期间呢，他多次的来到四川，跟踪督促这个项目，并且呢，也正是这个项目是莫妮卡介绍我认识你阿丽娜的。他那个时候就介绍了你也是道藏纪要编辑小组的成员，那个时候他给我介绍的，并且介绍了你的那个学术背景。你喜欢研究，你关注的是清代的吕洞宾，而莫妮卡呢，他从一开始研究道教呢，他最先注重的是内丹学的研究。我和莫妮卡认识是1985年在法国参加，我在法国访问待了一段时间，然后参加了一个研究会，国际研讨会，是日本和法国人共同办理的。那个时候我就提交了一篇论文，就是道教内丹术的研究。所以说他那个时候就非常感兴趣的是内丹术的研究。而就像 刚才倪志天教授所讲到的，这个道藏纪要里面有1/3都是讲类单数的，并且都是清代出现的一些新的书。那么这个是非常值得研究的一个文化现象。所以从那个时候起，莫妮卡教授就和我经常的往来。那么我呢，实际上我做道教研究是从81年2月份正式考进了社会科学院，我才开始做的。我在做这个道教研究的过程中呢，和其他的很多教授不一样，我非常重视田野调查。从81年到现在，我做了整整40年的道教研究，那就跑了40年的田野调查，所以说就收集了大量的民间流传的道教的文献、水陆画、文物，那样的东西加起来有几千件。但是呢，我一直都没有忽略对巴蜀地区的道教文献的收集和整理，一直在做。现在刚刚又得到了国家社科基金项目，一直在做。我做的这一切都和你们现在关心的道藏纪要、关心的清代的道教、区域性的道教密切相连。我就先讲到这儿。好，谢谢大家。
如果有时间，阿丽娜，我只讲2-3分钟，很简单。对，首先谢谢你们邀请我，很高兴跟大家在网络上见面。对，其实呢要表示祝贺这个论坛呢顺利召开，这个道藏纪要的纪要呢顺利出版。对，这个我是记不太清楚是2005年还是2006年的时候，实际上是当时从中文大学李志天教授那毕业到四川，2004年到那个地方不长时间了，就接到莫妮卡教授的实际上是邮件的一个邀请我参加这个道藏纪要的研究。对，这个之后呢，李彦国教授讲他实际上经常跑成都来做调研，主要到青羊宫去做一些这个调查，因为青羊宫那个道藏纪要也好，还有包括广成遗址那个经版还在。当时呢，他一个是跑李彦国老师那，一个呢是跑川大。这个我就陪他来川大呢，我就要陪他从这边到青羊宫那边去。是当时骑自行车，我们俩骑自行车去。对，在这个过程中，实际上我没有帮上什么忙，但是呢，陪他跑青羊宫考察这个经版呢，我有一些认识。这个，然后我想说，可能李教授刚才谈了这个道藏纪要这个卷数这个版本有很多疑问，可能跟这个我现场看到的一些情况有关系。对，后来呢，先把后面讲了。莫妮卡也邀请我这个写一些稿子，其实主要让我写金明道的一些经典。金明道的经典也不多，大概只有三种。实际上当时就写完就交给他。后来呢，他不幸去世以后呢，李志天教授接手这个事，这个又重新修改过这个稿件。对，交了以后呢，后期呢主要是李教授组织其他人在做，这个我就没有太多的参与。我想说一下这个当时在青羊宫看到的这个情况，和李志天教授刚才讲的，还有书里面写的这个版本的一个很复杂的情况，这个可能跟这个现象有关系。实际上当时我去那个地方看了，他这个印刷这个道藏纪要也好，广成遗址也好，这些经典他还在印，一直到2000几年他们还在印这个东西，因为可以卖钱嘛。对，它不是我们想象的那种印刷哗啦哗啦印出来的，它就是那个基本上一页一页手工印，那些道士一页一页印，因为在装订，而且那些印刷的这些道士呢，我说句实话，他们也不是印刷的专家，实际上都是没有什么经验的，所以很容易出错，装订出错，这个分类出错，所以这个样子呢，我看到这个巴黎那个本子我没有看过，巴黎那个本子就多出来一些经卷，这个还有重刊道藏纪要呢，实际上各个地方版本也不一样，就经都不一样。 所以我想可能跟这个有关系。相关的还有管城遗址也是这个样子，鄂西安还印过一个管城遗址，这个我们看到的战外道书里面那个管城遗址，和我在香港清松观看到那个管城遗址就收的经就不太一致，所以我想呢，可能这个考虑这个版本卷数不同的情况，可能除了学术上、学理上的一个考察，可能还要考虑这种现实的那么一个他们经验不足的那么一个状况。对，我想我就因为时间已经超了很多，就不再多说。这个就谢谢各位，很高兴见到大家。好，谢谢阿丽娜。
非常感谢。好，那我们this is my turn, so I will start. I will start by saying it's becoming clear, and it will continue to become clear how Monica had incredible personal connections in the scholarly world, and she was able to maintain personal and scholarly connections and to build such a large project from the beginning. So I think we should acknowledge her capabilities in both personal and scholarly connection in building this really great project that was then continued by Professor Lai. My own involvement, and I'll try to be brief here and let other people speak after me, but my own involvement with the Daozang Jiyao project started when Monica's invitation came to write an entry on the Nüdan Hebian, which is a collection, a small collection of female alchemy, so Neidan materials that was published in the Chongkang Daozang Jiyao, which just Guo just mentioned, published in Chengdu in 1906 and edited by one of its editors. So the Nüdan Hebian was edited by He Longxiang, which was also one of the general editors of the Chongkang Daozang Jiyao. And through this, and Monica really helped me. Monica at the time was doing her PhD in Paris, and I was doing my undergraduate thesis in Venice, and she helped me greatly in researching this topic when I was an undergraduate and then a graduate in London. And then when she asked me, therefore, to write about it a few years later, I was very happy to oblige. I just wanted to say that Monica is a real trailblazer in Qing Dynasty Taoism. In Paris, when she was doing her PhD dissertation on Minyu, a Qing Taoist priest of the 11th generation of the Longmen school, she definitely was, she was one of the few people who was taking Qing Taoism seriously at a time when this period was not really taken much into account because the conventional wisdom was that Taoism had been in decline. And so first by working with Isabelle Robinet and Catherine Despeux in Paris, but then moving on to Kyoto and then expanding her network to Academia Sinica, as well as Sichuan Daxue and the Sichuan Academy of Social Sciences. She expanded on this project of the Daozang Jiyao, but also on her knowledge and publications on Qing Taoism. She took Qing Taoism very seriously, and she also started taking seriously the practice of spirit writing, which as it became very clear that many of the scriptures, as Professor Lai just mentioned, included in this collection, had been transmitted through spirit writing and had been transmitted through spirit writing often in sessions honoring Lu Dongbing, from Lu Dongbing. And in her early years in this project were spent going across libraries across the world, finding different editions and really building on that understanding of the complex editorial history of the Daozang Jiyao, which Professor Lai just mentioned. And as he also mentioned, after her passing, he took over the helm of the project and continued pressing for the completion of the project after with many difficulties. His actions were fundamental in rescuing the project and bringing it to completion. He he created 3 different groups of editors and organized several meetings at the Chinese University on Hong Kong. And these meetings centered on how to best honor Monica's vision and wishes, but also at the same time how to move forward with the project, reorganizing it and making it more efficient. We had in these meetings in Hong Kong, we had discussions about the overall structure and publication history of the Daozang Jiyao, how to account for stray texts. As mentioned, is very difficult to account for all the stray texts that may or may not have been part of the Daozang Jiyao in all its edition. And then a common terminology and for all the entries, the best entry structure, what to put in the entry and what not to put in the entry, and finding new contributors for unassigned entries. That was also a real problem, to find people who were knowledgeable enough about these texts to actually write about them. I think we wanted, that Professor Lai and all of us wanted to produce a work as good as the companion to the Daozang, edited by Schipper and Verellen, and at the same time go even into more depth into each one of these texts. I want to also say that these meetings that followed, as well as some conferences, led to several publications in the area of late imperial Taoism, Lu Dongbing research, as well as spirit writing research. And now we can say that the importance of spirit writing in the context of late imperial Taoism, and especially the Daozang Jiyao, has become more and more clear. This research field is now flourishing. There's a book by Van Sanko started coming out in this area. There's another book of an edited volume by myself and Matthias Schumann on spirit writing. There's Wang Jinchuan and Fan Chongwu who have also published several articles, as well as an edited book in Taiwan. Professor Lai has published extensive research on spirit writing activities in southern China. So it is really flourishing, and we have to thank Monica for not only Monica, of course, but she definitely was a trailblazer in her interest in Qing Taoism, in her interest in the Daozang Jiyao, and taking seriously the texts that were produced in this period of time. So for myself, through my initial work on the Nudan Hebian, and then through my subsequent work for the Daozang Jiyao project, I also expanded my knowledge of this period of time, and became more interested in spirit writing, as well as in the Chunggang Daozang Jiyao, specifically the reedition published in Sichuan in 1906. And therefore, since then, I have expanded my own research in this region as well as in this period. So I want to, again, thank Monica for her trailblazing work, and everybody else that has worked on this project, because it has definitely helped my research grow and expand. Thank you.
Okay. Elena, you are muted.
Sorry. Yeah, the next presenter is Professor Ji-Yun Kim. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I will share screen. I shared my screen. Wait a minute. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this roundtable. I'm Ji-Yun Kim from Seoul National University. Previously, I was a faculty member of Kyoto University and joined the Daozang Jiyao project team as a coordinator of Japanese subcommittee. Today, I will talk about the history and development of the project, mainly at Kyoto University in Japan, and Japanese language editorial works. As Professor Lai introduced, this project was initiated by Professor late Monica Esposito. She won the research grant from the Taiwan Jiangxinguo Fund 2 times. Additionally, Professor Mugitan Kunio also won the JSPS grant of about $500,000 from 2008 to the end of 2011. The project co-investigators were Professor Monica Esposito, Christian Vitteren Funaima Toru, and Kogachi Ryuichi. And research collaborators from overseas were Lin Fushu, Li Wenguo, Guo Franciscus Velen, and Judith Bolt. Monica recommended me to write entries related to the Daozang Zhenjing about 2010, I remember. And I joined this project as a co-investigator after Monica passed away. The project achieved two main outcomes. The first outcome is the electronic version of Daozang Jiyao. It reproduces the Sichuan Ershenan version of Daozang Jiyao with accurate replication of each glyph and phrase according to the master copy. It also enables the producers a new standard version of Daozang Jiyao by comparing the old versions electrically. Professor Veteran led this work and now provides this electronic version on his website, Kanseki repository. We can use this database and compare the original Zhang Yupo's version and Sichuan Ershenan version. It also includes Mingjiangtong Daozang version. The second outcome is the bibliographies of each text of Daozang Jiyao. The project team verified the religious and cultural significance of Daozang Jiyao in the Qing dynasty through studying bibliographic data and the history of each text in Daozang Jiyao. Finally, the prototype of the companion to the Daozang Jiyao was printed in March 2012 from Jinbun Ken of Kyoto University. It included 92 entries. It is about 30% of the entire text of Daozang Jiyao. In 2012, the project was transmitted from Kyoto University to the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Here is Professor Mutani's speech at that time.
GDSF 的研究图纸是到本年3月份结束，所以去年11月，李教授再一次到京都来，跟我们商量Daozang Jiyao计划的今后的推行方法。结果，李教授和中文大学今后承担Daozang Jiyao计划，因此我们已经给中文大学提供了我们所有的资料，我们原稿之类。我们非常感谢李教授和中文大学的全面帮助，同时为了继承莫妮卡的遗志而完成Daozang Jiyao计划，原文出版Daozang Jiyao的节目，这题目，我衷心的希望各位教授的全面帮助。这是原来的那个简单的那个Daozang Jiyao计划的那个经过。
Right. The CUHK project team has 3 subcommittees of Chinese, English, and Japanese language teams. Professor Lai invited me to join the team, and I've worked as a member of the Japanese subcommittee. In 2012 and 2013, we held 2 project meetings at CUHK. The Japanese subcommittee members were Professor Mutani and Professor Mori and me. We continued to collect the bibliographical articles written in Japanese and proceeded to translate them into Chinese and English. In total, 116 articles were written in Japanese, 1 Korean, me, and 17 Japanese authors joined the project. The Chinese translators are mainly PhD students at Kyoto University, and 1 freelance translator, Lin Songtao, and 1 CUHK staff. The revision process took a lot of time. We kept contact with Japanese authors and Chinese translators, collecting the articles in translation, mediating the revision process. settling the payment, and sending the Chinese translation to the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I deeply appreciate all contributors, translators, CUHK staff of the project. I would like to extend congratulations on the final publication of the companion to the Daozang Jiyao. Thanks to this project, the studies in Linqing Taoism expanded. We got more knowledges on Linqing Taoism, literary cultures, and local histories. Based on textual studies of each text in Daozang Jiyao, we made many things clear, like genealogies, rituals, inner alchemical practice, spirit writing practice among the lay society members. Through the comparison between the older period Taoist text and the new text in Daozang Jiyao, we can trace the hermeneutic evolution. With this book, I hope the Taoist studies of the transition period from the late imperial China to modern era in East Asia will bring in a good harvest and fruitful researches. Thank you.
So we move on to Professor Hu Jiechen.
Many thanks to Professor Valusi and Professor Liu for organizing this roundtable and giving me the opportunity to share some behind-the-scenes stories of the editorial team during the preparation of the manuscript. Actually, I joined the editorial board in 2015. So when I took over the secretarial duties from Dr. Zhu Yiwen, all the documents and the records left to me by Dr. Zhu Yiwen were arranged, organized, and stored very well, very perfectly. So I just need to follow the protocol, and the project had been underway for several years at that time. So in fact, about 250 first drafts had been received. More than 200 of them were written in English and in Japanese, and some of which had been already translated into Chinese. So therefore, our work by that time was divided into three parts. The first is to collecting the unfinished manuscripts, and second is translating the English and the Japanese entries into Chinese and ensuring their quality. And the third is reviewing, formatting, editing, and polishing all the manuscripts. So although it sounds like a three-stage process, but the project schedule does not allow us to finish one stage before we moving on to the next. So we, basically we do all three parts of work at the same time. So in fact, for a variety of reasons, we finally collected all of the drafts until 2020, actually. This is also the result of a very long period of efforts by many of the board members of the editorial committee here. And they did the initial review and the revision of the original manuscripts, and followed by the formal submission. So at the same time, the editorial committee arranged for, all three subcommittees, Chinese, Japanese, and English, they arranged for suitable translators to translate English and Japanese entries. So this has also been a very difficult task, actually, and it's also something very different from the project Daozang Tongkao, because we had to translate the English and Japanese entries into Chinese. So however, we are pleased to find that the final result is still satisfactory. So most of the 23 translators are early career scholars in the field of humanity, and many of whom are actually in the field of Taoist studies. So it is reassuring to know that when we encounter the terminology such as internal alchemy or spirit writing, they know very specifically clearly that it stands for 内丹 rather than 内部炼金术 or something. When we encounter spirit writing, they know it stands for 伏击 rather than they want to translate it into 灵性书写 or other awkward expressions. So in order to ensure the quality of the translation and the quality of the entries, which was originally written in Chinese, so a review team was set up in 2015, led by the chief editor, Professor Lai Zhiting, consisting mainly of Professor Lai himself and Daoist researchers at the center at CUHK, including full-time researchers, postdoc fellows and PhD students. So we met regularly to discuss sentence by sentence the first drafts of each entries, and no matter translated or originally written in Chinese, I mean. So this review process continued almost until the very final stage of the editorial process. So in fact, we did find some problems in the process of reviewing the manuscripts. And sometimes the mistakes were caused by translations. So we discussed and corrected them directly. And occasionally, the translator might be a bit unfamiliar with the original text or the specific field. And we found that there were more problems. So we will choose to assign a new translator to revise it, or even simply retranslate the whole entry and then discuss it again. We repeated this process until the overall translation is basically satisfactory. So once each entry had been reviewed by the team, we made further edits, including standardizing punctuation, formatting, unifying the variant characters, reference, etc. So we also checked the long quotations, and finally we asked professional editors to polish the text. So many of the problems encountered at this stage were basically technical in nature. So especially with regard to document formats, the computer coding, and the variant characters. So variant characters are always a problem for these books for traditional China. So, and then we also try to preserve the structure and the style of the original entry as much as possible, so that we can still read from the book today a very personal entry of the contributor's academic style. So we have more than 70 international scholars. So this book is also like a map of the contemporary Dao scholarship, I think. So after the polishing of the manuscript, we fed back to the contributors through the board members of the editorial committee to obtain their feedback and approval. So basically, for me personally, one major regret is that due to the outbreak of COVID, so I could no longer go to Hong Kong to participate directly in the final stage of the project from 2020 onwards. So by the time I finally participated, the entire manuscript was already in place, but it could only be described as alpha version 1.20 or something like that. So therefore, I know very well that Professor Lai's team, including Dr. Chen Wenyan and other colleagues, spent a lot of effort to polish it into what we see today. And all in all, I am personally very happy to have met this project. And in addition to the academic gains, I have also made many friends when doing the project. So that's why I'm still very happy right now about its publication. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Professor Hu. And we will move now on to Professor Mori.
Hi, everyone. I do appreciate, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I do appreciate that Professor Elena Valisi and Professor Liu Xun organized this very timely and important meeting. And it is great pleasure for me to have a chance to talk to celebrate the publishing of the Daozang Jiyao Tiyao. When this project was launched under the leadership of Dr. Monica Esposito and Professor Li Qitian, Daoism in the Qing period was rather, as Professor Valisi has mentioned, was rather minor field in the area of study of Daoism. But their project has totally changed the situation. Through their study and their project, they succeeded in making international Taoist scholars pay much attention to the importance of Taoism in the Qin period. As a result, study of the Qin Taoism came to the forefront and was recognized as a major area, one of the major areas of Taoist studies. I am one of the many scholars who have reaffirmed the importance of this field as this project developed. Before this project was launched, I still clung in some way to the insider-outsider dichotomy of Taoism. One of the most important subjects of Taoist study had long been the study of Taoism as a religion of the Taoist priests and communities where Taoist priests were included as very important ritual practitioners. As Taoist knowledge of Taoist ritual was highly esoteric and complicated, it was very difficult for those who were not initiated as Taoist priests, typically Confucian intellectuals, to deal with Taoist rituals, Taoist texts, and Taoist society as it was. They were the outsiders. As Taoist scholars deepened their study of the Tianshi Dao, Shanqin, Linbao, and Quanzhen, and other traditions represented by professional Taoist priests, we came to know how large the gap between the knowledge of Taoist priests and that of the outsiders represented by the Confucian intellectuals was. Daozang Jiyao was a compilation of Taoist texts compiled by an elite Confucian official, Zhang Yupu. He was a leading member of a spirit writing cult, as Professor Lai Qi-Tim has mentioned, a spirit writing cult to Lü Dongbing, a typical religious movement prominent in the mid-Qin period. As far as extant sources tell us, Zhang Yupu was not initiated by any Taoist priests, but he created several texts used for initiation ritual and daily rituals conducted by Taoist clergy. Thus, spirit writing cult to Lü Dongbing was, so to say, a convenient gateway for him to step into and intervene Taoist tradition. When I reconstructed such situation in the course of study of Daozang Jiyao, I vaguely presumed that it was an act of outsiders' interpretation or understanding of Taoism, which constituted an expression of spirituality a little bit different from pictures drawn by the insiders of Taoism, that is, by very professional Taoist priests. I regarded Confucian scholars who were interested in Taoism as outsiders of Taoism, who were basically ignorant of Taoist priest knowledge. However, as I followed the works of such scholars as Lai Qi-Tim, Elena Valesi, Liu Xun, Vincent Vincent-Gosal, and most importantly, Daniel Gorton-Rose and Hu Jie-Chan. And so they dealt with the Qin Taoism, especially literary Taoism, as one of the most important and eminent aspect of Taoism after the Song period. I was tempted to assume that literary's knowledge of Taoism was not something which created outside or in the peripheral area of Taoism. As my idea about what is literary Taoism is not matured, I am not going to refer to this further, but I believe this question would include such inquiries as who were the literary Taoists? What were the conditions for being a literary Taoist? How diverse types of interest in Taoism were ranged in the area spread between various professional Taoist priests at one pole and Confucian elite officials at the other? How was the relationship between Taoist knowledge owned by various Taoist priests and Taoist knowledge shared with or created by various literati. How literati who were not necessarily initiated as Taoist priests contributed to create an image of Taoism shared and imagined by a very wide range of people as one of the most profound and ethical foundation, which provided ethical justification to those who wanted to lead meaningful life. I'm not sure it is proper to mention my view, my very vague and immature idea about literati Taoism here, because many of you are more were really good professionals than I am. So, but what I want to show is that this project initiated by Dr. Monica Esposito and led by Professor Li Qitian gave me very exciting experience of examining Taoism from new and different angles than I ever depended on. I'm truly grateful to late Dr. Esposito and Professor Lai for having taken me to this place where we can share new landscape of Taoist studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mori. And now to the final speaker of today, Professor Vincent Goussard.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy and grateful to be part of this event. I mean, the Global Taoist Forum is one of the few good things that have happened during these last awful 2 years. And each event of this forum is exciting and bring us together as a community. And this event today is particularly moving because we celebrate Monica, we celebrate the great work that we have all done together. We celebrate the publication of this superb 3-volume book, and we celebrate ourselves in a way. When I try to recollect how I got into that project, that was about 15 years ago. What I recall is how Monica made me, and I'm sure made many of us, read new things, because she assigned entry to us. She didn't say like, what would you like to write? Said, you are going to write on this and that. And these were not the texts I would have picked. And I'm really grateful she made me read these things I would not have read otherwise, or maybe I would much later, and with much less focus on detail. I'm having to write a description of those texts. And the first text I read for the Daozang Jiyao project is a Domu scripture. Yeah, it's a Jiyao scripture. It's about not killing animals and vegetarianism and so on and so forth. And it's an absolutely fascinating text. It's a little bit obscure in some ways, not very well written, but it's absolutely fascinating. And I got entranced by that text, and I still remember very clearly my feelings when I was reading this text 50 years ago. And that made me realize a lot of things: the importance of eschatology. I mean, the fears about the end of the world in the late imperial period. It's a Jiyao text, so it's about 1805 or 6 or something like that. The importance of eschatology, the importance of animals and alimentation in elite religious lives, the importance of Domu as a deity, and many other things. And I wrote other entries on texts I would not have picked myself otherwise as well, and they were all exciting. And in a nutshell, that is, I think that's also a larger experience, is when you are part of a collective project like this, you do things you would not have done if you were only pursuing your own personal project. And you're going against prejudice, because there much less, I guess, now, thanks to this project and of all of our publications. But still, to some extent, there is a prejudice that late texts like, Qing, 18th, 19th century Taoist scriptures or popular scriptures are not interesting, right? They are repetitive, nothing new. They are boring. They are just conservative. They're just rehearsing things that we have been there for centuries. This is simply not true. These texts are really interesting. In the Daozang, you have lots of liturgy. I mean, the scriptures were meant to be performed. They were not essays. They were sacred texts meant for performance. So you have the scriptures, and you have all litanies, right? There's a very large amount of litanies in the canon. And that also made me, and I'm sure made many of us, realize that the lives of late imperial elites were full of rituals, and not only so-called Confucian rituals, right, of ancestor sacrifices and so on and so forth, but lots of Taoist rituals, and not just rituals, esoteric things done by priests on behalf of so-called lay people, but these literati were chanting scriptures, were performing litanies all the time. That's why they were revealing them, writing them, editing them, and then performing them. Right? So it was, Monica, having us read all those things opened my eyes to this new world. Well, I had some ideas, of course, but having to read through all this, I really discovered a new continent. And also as a member of the editorial team with Elena and Paul for the English language committee, we had to read everything, right? Read all the entries. And again, that was the same experience, reading things you would not read otherwise if you just stick to your own favorite, garden of things that you cultivate because you love them. You read a lot of things. And yet you discover new things, and you situate the text you're interested in a larger context. And then you can, reading through all of this, one can start to understand what a canon is. Looking at this collection of text as a collection with its own, overall logic, and not just as collections of different texts that may interest different scholars with different research questions. And I hope that the readers who will have the Daozang Jiyao on their shelves or find them in the libraries will read them as a book, cover to cover. Okay, that's 1,500 pages, but it's worth reading, not just using it as a dictionary, somewhere that you go to because you need one information on one particular page on one particular text or person, but something you should read through because you learn by reading through all of the description of the canon. You read about everything, including things you don't know much about. Self-cultivation, ritual, doctrine, scriptures, God, the geography, and so on and so forth. And one should really benefit from reading it all. Okay, what did I find when reading all of those texts and reading also the entries written by other contributors? I found that reading spirit-written texts is not so easy because, among other things, there's the question of authorship. Right? Who is the author of a spirit-written text? And that's something we experience when editing entries. We had to argue or discuss with some contributors for whom the God is just, sort of a name holder for a real human person who is writing, which is true in a certain sense, but is very wrong in some other sense. The gods, Lu Zu, of course, but other gods as well in the canon, Wencheng and Guandi and Domu and many others. They are divine persona. And it's something I'm still trying to think through this question, what is a divine persona and what is a divine author to whom these texts are attributed? And that's something we need to take seriously. And so what I was just mentioning, we had an issue with an author who was writing about the Zhan Sanfeng revelations, and it was writing about, is there a real Zhan Sanfeng, and writing about the early Ming. I said, yes, that's an interesting topic, but that's not what you should be writing about. What you should be writing about is how Zhan Sanfeng, whether this person ever existed, probably never, but that's not the question. How Zhan Sanfeng as a divine person was writing things in the 19th century. That's the question at hand, right? And that's not an easy question to deal with when you're not, regularly dealing with this question of divine authorship. So that was one of the things that this project really helped develop as an important research question in our field. We also found a lot of things about religious lives of the elite. One of the first things I read was Judith Ball's entry on the Yuquan. And it's an absolutely magnificent text. And it really opened my eyes to how these texts in the canon tell a lot about the private life experiences of people that we know otherwise from other kind of sources, but would never guess at such rich spiritual lives. And I also wanted to mention Judith Bowles, because she passed away shortly after Monica the same year, and it's also a person much missed in our field. She also contributed a lot to our understanding of late imperial Taoism, spirit writing, and other topics. So an entry on YouTube was really a model, something that we can still try to emulate. Also, Philippe Clark wrote a beautiful entry on the Lüzu Shiliu Pinjing, which also has a lot of stories about the people who created this text and talked with the god. And all the Yulu are the dialogue between these elite humans, males usually, and the gods, which form an important part of the Daozang Jiyao, well, especially the later, I mean, the Qing edition, the Zhongwai text, is also something really fascinating that had never been studied before, and that's really rewarding as reading material. And this very intimate experience of humans putting their questions and their life problems to the gods, and the gods talking with them and trying to help them overcome these problems. So that's two, and it's certainly not limited to that, but two important things the Daozang Jiyao project did for me, and I'm sure for many of us. That was mentioned before, so I'm not going to elaborate on this, but it created a community. It's really important. I see on my screen faces of friends, and you know, friendship is something extremely important to our lives. Some were friends before, some became friends through the project, but in any case, it created a community. That's where we help and support each other. We had nice conferences that was mentioned before in Hong Kong several times, thanks to Professor Lai Jitim, in London recently. And it's a community that will continue to grow, because hopefully we are all training young scholars to read this text and to do that kind of serious textual and text historical analysis of late imperial Chinese religious productions. And as this community grows, hopefully it will become easier and easier for young people who have done a PhD looking at that kind of material to find a job, because their topic will be considered as an important and central topics in Chinese studies or religious studies, which is still not always the case, I'm afraid, in some universities across the world. We've been working together, and I've been writing entries on Wenchong text, and then Hu Jichen edited them, and then I found out that he knew, of course, so much more than I do about Wenchong text production. So the Daozang Jiyao is not just a collection of independent entries put together. It's really the product of a collective work, and it's, you know, collective work like this always end up being more than the sum of its parts. So this was, again, a very rewarding and enriching experience. And as a last remark, if I still have 30 seconds, Elena? Yes, thank you. So I think this project and this publication is a benchmark. Hopefully it will be emulated. There are many other collections that would really need to have that kind of work done about them to make them accessible to people. I think that's one of the important points. Make people who would not necessarily do Qing Taoism, but who would find things interesting in Daozang Jiyao material, open that collection for them. And of course, the online digital edition was extremely important. It's a high quality, it's a model of the genre. But also the catalog allow people who are not specialists to understand what this text, where does it come from, what is it all about. And it was also, if I may share my screen for a second, it was, yes, also an inspiration for a project which is in fact very different in its aim and nature, but which was inspired in many ways by the Daozang Jiyao project. That's the CRTA, Chinese Religious Text Authority project, which is an entirely open access online database of Chinese religious texts in general. And as you may see, the first corpus of text that we include in this database is the Daozang Jiyao, of course. So here we see it sitting where it belongs, that is on the top. And I'll stop here. Thank you again, Elena and Leo.
Thank you very much, Vincent. I also want to reiterate the importance, the personal importance of this project, not just the scholarly importance of the project for keeping us as a community and fostering so many friendships. So I want to thank both Monica for initiating this and Professor Lai for continuing to bring us together. So thank you all, the speakers today. I know that Liu has mentioned in the chat that if you want, you can ask questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself as well. I see there is one question to Professor Vincent Cossart by Beverly Zhang. I will read it. Oh, well, I guess, Vincent, you can see it, right, in the chat.
Would you like me to answer that question briefly?
Yes, repeat the question and answer.
Yeah, it's a very simple, straightforward question. Are the divine beings real? What do you think are the underlying factors for reference to, if not creation of those divine beings? When I say divine persona, I make absolutely no judgment whether they exist in fact or not. That's not the point. And I'm not really interested in that question because there are different answers. And I mean, I'm not a believer, but I don't care whether, I mean, they really exist or not. What I see is that they function certainly as independent entities, not just names given to human actors that attribute their writings to another one. And they have personalities, and these personalities have constraints, right? They exist in, well, there are many ways you can account for that, but in an interesting way is the theory of social network, actors in social networks that Bruno Latour has developed among other people, right? So they are actants, entities that do things. And they are not necessarily human, and you don't need to make any judgment about their ontological existence to study them as independent entities that exist. So I'm not sure that's a very clear answer, but that's how it works.
Thank you, Professor.
So we are now moving towards the question and answer, as you've noticed, and we do have. So initially we planned for this to be until 9:30. I mean 10:30 Eastern time. Sorry, I'm in Chicago. But I think we should definitely allow for more questions if everybody wants to intervene. And I see Gil wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Perhaps I could interject that. Give me 1 second. There were two ways of doing this discussion, right? So you can actually raise your hand, as Gil has done, pressing the button there, or you can actually enter your question in chat. So we and maybe we can read it, and then we can go to your question. So you can also speak up as well. But let's give Gil, who actually raised his hand first. Please, Gil.
Well, first, I want to thank everybody involved in the project. I mean, it's hard to believe that it actually came to be. So really fantastic, and so interesting to hear all your comments, and yeah, fantastic work. So my first question is, of course, if this is going to come out in English at some point. Very simple question, very difficult answer, I suppose. And my second question actually in some way kind of follows up from Beverly's question and what Vincent was saying. So you mentioned like over 30% or whatever number is speed writing, which people talk about as sort of a new thing in China. And of course, my interest is older stuff. And I was just reading the Zhang Gao translations by Bogenkamp, which of course also mostly written by spirits. Channeled through Yangshi and so on. So I think these questions are not just about sort of Qing Dynasty Taoism or whenever speedwriting took on as a very specific sort of category, but it's something that's very inherent to Chinese religions. And I think perhaps the kind of work that you're working with can actually help us understand much older sort of traditions of writing and creation in China. So maybe just reflect on that for a bit, or we don't have to, can maybe think about some other time. Thank you.
Maybe we can direct the first question to Professor Lai.
Yes, for the English publications, I would like to make some points. The publication of the companion in Chinese version in this year really set up a very solid foundation to the next step of the publication of the Daozang Jiyao in English, because it set up a very standard reference for English translation of all Chinese abstracts, which we are located and identified in the Chinese version. So a professional translation team has already formed and start to work early in this year. So in the past, within the past 9 months, our professional translation team already finalized very standard style sheet to facilitate the further translation in English. And also we achieve a standard English titles of all 314 Daozang Jiyao texts. And also we achieve a large set of data set for Dao's terms in Chinese and English. So we are now planning to digitize all, the data set of all Dao's terms and titles in our website. And this is very good and also happy moments to let all of us, especially all our authors of the Daozang Jiyao, that the English manuscripts is moving on, and also with all these solid foundations that we have achieved in the past 9 months. In the coming couple of years, I hope within 3 years, we will finish first copy editings of all English abstracts in the original, and also the translation of all Chinese abstracts, which are in Chinese and in Japanese in original. So it's hoped that the first version of the manuscript of the companion and English version will be ready after 3 years. So I hope all of us will have another moment of celebration for the publication of the English companion within 3 years. So this is the announcement I make at this moments when we met tonight in Hong Kong time. and for Gil's the second question, there's no doubt. If you enter into religious world, this is about the link between the believer and the deities that they worship. So no, I think that this is not only the spirit writing is one of the medium, but for example, you mentioned Zhengao. So the question is that as scholars of Taoism or Chinese religions, we need to emphasize the connection and also the link between the believer and the deities they believed. So that's not surprised that spirit writings as the means of cultivating the believer and the deities they worship. And also for the study of Zhen Gao, I think we need to emphasize this kind of connection between the Xu family and the deities. They invoke and invite to send message to the family about the questions they were concerned. So, and also the same situation for spirit writings of Liu Zhu authors. And I also want to make a recommendation that all spirit writings authors dedicated to Liu Zhu, not Liu Dongbing. So we always address the issues, the relationship between Liu Dongbing and Liu Zhu. But indeed, the believers of spirit writing authors, they believe and they have faith in Liu Zhu and not in faith in Liu Dongbing. But you know, this is a very complicated religious questions about the relationship between Liu Dongbing and Liu Zhu. But we can organize a conference for example, the deification of immortals into Taoist deities. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lai. Do we have any other questions or comments to that initial question?
And also I want to ask Vincent, you emphasize the ritual text collected in Daozang Jiyao. There's no doubt that there's one text, Chanfa Dai Guan, but I wonder in terms of all texts collected in Daozang Jiyao, whether the rituals texts are very important for spirit writing authors. This is my question.
Yes, I think all these, well, many of these spirit writing authors did produce texts for ritual use. I mean, ritual manuals, lots of litanies, Chan by Chan the Chan, some Liandu rituals, you know, for salvation of the dead, some other things.
But sorry,
but
for
not...
I mean the Liandu text. You know, this is a text collected by Chongkan Daozang Jiyao, not related to Zhen Tan.
Right,
so,
right.
So we need to make a distinction between Daozang Jiyao and Chongkan Daozang Jiyao. If you want to speak about the rituals text, whether it's very important for spirit writing text, but spirit writing authors. But for Chongkan Daozang Jiyao, you know very well that this is not a result from a spirit writing authors in Chengdu.
Right. No, you are absolutely right, of course. Yeah, I really agree. What I meant is that these authors produced text and they performed these texts, but they were not always included in canons. We find them in other places. So what I meant is not only Daozang Jiyao itself, and of course it's extremely, as you have said, it's really important to understand as the Jiyao as a canon, what is in it and what is not in it. It has its own logic. But then the authors that produce the text that went into the canon also produce other text. And we have lots of these ritual manuals of the spirit writing authors elsewhere in other collections or as individual books, right? So that's what I meant. I mean, beyond the Daozang Jiyao, there were all these authors that fed into Daozang Jiyao, but they also did other things. And many of those other things are rituals.
Yeah, thank you for your clarification. I just want to
no, you're absolutely right.
The Daozang Jiyao. Okay.
Tobias?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this wonderful introduction. And I really look forward. I hope that my library will get one of those, and then I can look into it actually for reals. My question that I have to you, right? I mean, the author type of stuff that you were just talking about, right? What's more important is the author, or is it the author figure at the end of the day? I think raises some interesting question about like what kind of information you wanted to put, I assume, into the entries. And right, I mean, there's a kind of a default move that, you know, especially I think in sinology or in Chinese studies, right, that is still based on biblical studies ideas, going back to the original, who's the source and so forth in terms of textual history, that seem to be at odds in some ways to the way how these texts actually work. And so I was wondering, how did you weigh what kind of information you put into an entry? How much did you put in that is, let's say, the historians' almost default obsession with finding out what is historically accurate about these texts, and what do you put in that is perhaps not historically accurate, but is perhaps important for the context of the kind of text that you're dealing with? So the question, in some sense, how did you weigh what context of these individual texts was emphasized or was given space, and what was basically said was important information for people when they engage with these texts? Is it the historical facts around these things, or is it actually more like the kind of way how people might have engaged with them? And so just perhaps can you expand a tiny bit more on your politics of the entries in that sense?
I can start by saying, reiterating what Vincent was saying about that it really isn't important to know about the original context of a certain divinity. When we were editing, we were very careful, and of course our authors were very careful about the textual history, as well as the dating, as well as the prefaces that sometimes existed for each text or collection. So that work was extremely precise about, you know, who wrote the preface, when did they wrote it, where did they write it, where they connected to a specific altar and community. And then the question of the relationship between the believers and the people who received at a certain point in time and in a certain very specific place, relationship with the divinity, that is a completely different question that, as Vincent said in that particular entry, but in other entries too, we didn't want to inquire about the history of the god itself, but rather the connection between that particular community at that particular time with this god, with this divinity. But I defer to other people in the editing, or to other people to discuss this.
I want to make 3 points regarding these questions. First of all, historical context about the origin of this text are very important. And indeed, I need to say thanks to Monica's to set up this requirement for all authors of abstracts. We need to make try our best to make clear the origin and also the textual sources of all those Daozang Jiyao texts. Without this kind of academic work, all our analysis of the text have no solid foundation for further exploration. So this is the first point. And I do think that the achievement of the companions will be assessed according to this kind of perspective for our serious work on the origin of the text. This is the first point. But the second point I do think that if scholars and readers have no interest in all this kind of historical data of Daozang Jiyao text, and if he or she has only interest in knowing the faith, the Taoist faith reflected by this text, I do think that Daozang Jiyao text can help scholar and reader to understand the continual development of Taoist faith from the past until the Qing period crystallized by spirit writing believers. Indeed, yes, I do think that there's a depth of Taoist faith demonstrated by spirit writing authors. Especially as Wanzhong saying that there's not only faith in Liu Zhu, but faith in Wenchang, faith in Guandi and Daomu. So I do think that when scholar and reader would if he or she like to understand more the development of Taoist faith causing the histories, I do believe that Daozang Jiyao or Chongkan Daozang Jiyao can fulfill this kind of expectation. And the third point I really want to emphasize, the inner alchemy text. Without this interest and perspective from inner alchemy text, you will miss the very great achievement of Daozang Jiyao, or not only because there's a new text of inner alchemy, but quite a number of commentaries on inner alchemists already connected before the publication of the Daozang Jiyao in Jiaqing period. So I learned a lot from studying the inner alchemy text connected in Daozang Jiyao, and so I recommend scholars, if he or she want to study more about the development of the tradition of inner alchemy in the past until the Jiaqing period, Daozang Jiyao should be and must be a good reference for understanding and studying for this purpose. Thank you.
May I use my privilege as the sort of a moderator to say a few things on this issue that Tobias raised. I think it's very important, and we must also admit, I mean, while this is a great achievement, I mean, we have probably, constructed sort of a state-of-the-art sort of work on the late imperial, especially surrounding sort of a body of canonical works and all that. And that goes without saying. But I also want to point out, actually using maybe Tim's own sort of a discussion early on about this as being a sort of a staging point, really a platform, a stage to progress, right? There were many, many items in actually the compendia in Daozang, in Jiyao, that still have a lot of holes and gaps. We have not the whole sort of a field of the late imperial Taoist studies and regional Taoist studies haven't advanced to the degree that we could solve some of the gaps, and some of the, despite all the standard we could put out there in terms of editing, there were still just, a lot of gaps. I mean, one issue is surrounding a deity, a secondary deity, but somewhat important, but mysteriously, present in the Chongkan version of it. This is among the litany, Can, Menggong, whom I actually looked at as one of the emerging deities in the Jingyuan transition period. But I didn't realize until, this editing of this work, participating in, that Menggong appeared as one of the, what is it, Yufu Canjiao Da Shi. And so it's very mysterious. There is no explanation as to why. You only have clues in the Yuan period. He appeared in one of the Yuan texture that had been rehabilitated instead of a Song general who had actually demolished the last bastion of the Jin Empire in northwestern and southwestern part of the Henan, Hubei, in that region. I mean, in that region, we have no explanation, period, to say why he's evoked. He's now ascended as a deity in this rather late imperial, period. So it is a lot of mystery, a lot of gaps remain. We have to own up to that, and just to say, this is the beginning. We have to wait until, I'm working on it now, but we have to wait until further evidences that comes in to definitively say who is the author, or at least what was the context, the human context or social context that were involved in producing this whole series of litanies that appeared in this Congkan or in this Daozang Jiyao later on. So I think that it is really intriguing, but it is also a stage period of work. But I think that Daozang's earlier presentation and from the slide he's showing the current project suggests that maybe Daozang Jiyao is one of the sort of culminating point of a long process of a canonical making, a canonical production, as a way to consecrate not only a new group of deities and new religious techniques, including, of course, spirit writing, and really, religious groups as well that are associated with this sort of Rantan, with this sort of a spirit writing group, because many of these earlier technologies that dates back to Zhengkao didn't really get authenticated or really become orthodox until a later period. So this is, again, it's a mode of religious production, of texts, of gods, and of social groups that are involved. So I think that maybe Daozang is saying something that we all need to pay attention to. That is, of course, there were way out there many more collections and compendia beyond Daozang Jiyao that are not being collected in Daozang Jiyao, but in all these Quanshu style of, that actually was the starting point of working on Daozang Jiyao. So I think that we have really got into something that I think are crucial for understanding late imperial religiosity and also the mode of religious production. And indeed, beyond the field of religion, it's really for us to re-familiar ourselves, or maybe re-recognize intellectual life, and popular cultural life as well. I think this has a lot of really important points for departure into and break out into the larger sort of field of Chinese social and intellectual history of the late imperial. I think there were just so many interesting points for the late stage of work as well. So I'll just stop there.
Any other questions or comments?
Liu Xun's observations very, very good. Indeed, I start to study Daoism from Dao's canon, and when I moved to the Daozang Jiyao studies, I found new names of deities, new group of deities which were not found in Dao's canon. So the religious life and also religious faith by the believers of spirit writing orders, they demonstrate the vitality of religious life in the spirit writing orders. So I have a very good experience of knowing the continuous religious development of Daoist orders from Ming until the Qing period. And indeed, because I can conduct a fieldwork of spirit writing orders in Hong Kong, so when I join these orders, activities, celebration, and religious events, I found a difference of religious, I found another group of Taoist deities worshipped by them. So this is a very spectacular phenomenon for us to study modern Taoism. If we follow the standard, the norm set by Taoist canon, then we find a gap. We really find a gap between the Taoist history before the Ming period and after Ming period. So this is really a gap. Liu Xun, do you have any response? I would like to have a dialogue with you on this part. New group of deities we found in Daozang Jiyao.
You can start another conference and lead everybody to Hong Kong. When the pandemic lifts, we can then talk.
Yeah, I'm very interested in.
But
Yeah,
actually,
so I think we
one suggestion briefly. It just you know, when you said that the translation is in making, and that's basically translating these entries. You know, the one thing I was just thinking about is, okay, so Taoist study scholars can read the Chinese version as well. So what's the benefit of having the English version? Is it if it is just a translation of the Chinese stuff? I mean, it makes it faster for me to read through the entries. But that's basically, that's it. And so I was wondering, you know, is there perhaps a chance to make the English version something that is also at the same time advertisement in the English speaking world, that Taoist stuff is great and awesome, and actually, you know, people should hire more people in Taoist studies rather than Buddhist studies, for example, and like, you know, provide people with like materials, you know, that they can utilize. Because I mean, so the one thing that, for example, I always had a bit of a problem with the shipper thing. It's for research purposes really great, but at the end of the day, the Daozang is really not usable in many forms for people who are not in Taoist studies, right? And so, could you, for example, instead of add to these entries like short translations of a central passage from these texts, so that people can get a sense of what actually is going on, rather than just have a summary? I mean, I know that is a massive extra labor in many ways, right? And I don't know whether it's feasible, but if you could do that, I think, you know, it would be really like amazing, to be honest. It's a kind of a contribution, because at the end, I think otherwise it just becomes an English extra that people in Taoist studies, it will be helpful, but it's not something that is needed at the end then. So that I would perhaps put it that way, right? It's not a necessity. It's a nice commodity. But I think you have something that you could make really into something that people need.
Just to build on what Tobias said, I think that this project clearly have established that Chinese elite, which will always think about Confucian inspired or minded or whatever, actually they, in their real life, I mean, in their real practices, they are much, much more wedded with a lot of the sort of a Taoist, we now term as a Taoist or Daozang Jiyao type of activities, much, much more deeply ingrained and rooted among them. And how do we have this project, reach out to the larger sort of field of late imperial social and intellectual historian or cultural historian in general? I think that maybe is something we could think about, how to make the English, edition, whether that's going to be a long line or maybe the 3-volume set. One way or the other, we should make this as one of the basic 2 books for the study of late imperial history, period. Not religious, just it's something who want to work on Qing, you need to go to this. I mean, so we need to try to, I don't know, you said advertisement, I like it, but in some way we need to sell it, right? Basically to the larger field of late imperial, yeah.
There's another conference that we need to organize then.
Tim, you heard that, right?
Yeah, I learned a lot. But I always have a dream for the future development of Taoist studies, which should not be restricted within a small group of Taoist scholars. We should expand our scope and also communications with other scholars in fields of Chinese culture, history, and related areas. So for the project of English editions of the companions, it's my hope that we can expand the study of Qing Taoism or modern Taoism to other fields of scholars and get their dialogue with our group of Taoist scholars. So this is the first point. The second point is that during the past 9 months, when I share when we discuss the abstracts in Chinese, and when we translate the Chinese into English, I come to another world. This is a world of interpreting Taoist thought into another world. So this is not just a kind of simple translation. So I do think that this is a kind of cultural exchange through the interpretation of Chinese text. So this is the reason I trust the English translation project is valuable and meaningful for future study of Taoism. So this is the second point I would like to respond to the necessity of doing translation of Chinese abstracts. And the third point I want to, this is also my hope that with two copies of Daozang Jiyao in Chinese, I mean the companion in Chinese and English, we have a very good dialogue of Taoist culture in Chinese and in English. So this is a kind of cultural projects, not just a kind of Taoist projects. Whether Liu Xin or our colleagues share my dreams for the coming English edition of the companion. For example, I'm building up a huge data set for the Taoist titles and terminology in English and in Chinese. And indeed, this is a bridge between the West and the East in Taoist culture.
I agree with Eleanor. We need to have more sort of a sessions similar like this one. Maybe Daozang and maybe Yu Yanguo. You can all introduce the ongoing project that that are breaking out new areas of studies of late imperial Taoism and also culture and society in general as well. So yeah. So in our next meeting, I'm going to try to propose that to see if Global Forum, Global Taoist Study Forum, can host more editions that feature ongoing projects that's going to further build out what we have here. So
yeah, for example, Professor Liu Yanguo was just saying that he has this ongoing project on texts, Taoist texts in Sichuan, and I think one of the great things that has come out of this Daozang Jiyao project is the question of regional and local communities and regional differences between the different altars and the deities that they worshipped and the kind of texts that they received and the differences, the regional differences between these communities. And so attention not only to the question of spirit writing in general, but also the specific communities. I think we are moving very, very much in that direction to sort of understanding of local communities as well as transmissions and connections between local communities in different parts of China. And I think that looking, for example, what Professor Liu Yanguo was saying, looking at local Sichuanese texts, Taoist texts of the late imperial period seriously, I think it's a great example of this direction.
远国兄，所以我们要跟这个全球道教论坛的这个理事会，也许提出我们还要举办这个更多的类似的，就说这样的圆桌会议或者是专场会议来讨论一些正在进行的这个清代或者是这个帝制末期的一些这个专门的一些文本的收集整理的研究计划，比如还有你的这个道教艺术的也可以，就是做其中。那么同样高教授啊，我刚才看到高教授那个好像也进行了好几年了，所以也应该有一个也对我们这个道教学界可能有一个比较好的一个启发，就跟这个我们现在做的这个道藏纪要一样，也许会把这个整个帝制末期的帝制末期的这样的道教或者是中国社会文化的研究呢，把它更多的深化和扩展。We were way beyond schedule.
Yeah, we are way beyond. I don't know if Professor Yuanguo wants to answer, and then we should. Okay, so Yuanguo请。
远国兄，你有没有什么话要跟大家分享一下？
后来我们就结束。
你要把这个默音打开，你就可以讲话。我们现在听不到。
还没有
打开，没有打开。
解除。
好，可以了，可以了。
现在应该听到了啊。
听到了。
我们现在做的这个项目呢，不仅仅做四川地区的，现在已经扩展至贵州、云南，包括了云南的少数民族地区，他们留下来的一些道教的文献，一些道教的图像，还有碑刻，还有文物。所以我们要做的，现在实际上这个计划已经伸展到了西南3省，云贵川，就准备用5年8年的时间，系统的把西南地区的道教的地方文献、道教的文物、道教的绘画、道教的图像，有一个完整的收集整理的这样一个过程，并且呢要做一个数据库，把这些资料呢都能放在数据库上，都能放入平台上，供全世界研究道教的学者和专家共同的可以使用。这是我们正在做的这样一个计划。我就介绍到这儿。
更多细节以后专场介绍啊。高老师可不可以告诉我们一下？
不是，我们做的和川大做的有一些联系，但是也有所区别，尤其是我们现在收集的道教的图像、道教的水陆画，明、清、民国时期的，现在有3000多幅。
我和 Paul Anderson 到你家里去看过的，我知道你
那
是
现在已经3000多幅，3000多幅这些全部都会把它放在平台上。
上次出版的有多少？上次你出版的那个
现在还没有1本出版，现在正在编3册，估计明年能够出版，然后最后要出版的时候可能是应该有10多册吧。这个是在四川地区非常独特的一种道教的文化的史料。
I can attest. I can attest that Professor Liu's collection is amazing. I've been to his house to see the variety of texts, as well as paintings, as well as tools of Taoist priests. It was really incredible. So I really look forward to seeing this collection.
他们有2个李，一个是台湾的李老师，还有一个是四川的这个远国两他们都是大财主，大财主，可以开博物馆。
对。 已经有博物馆，已经有，是不是？李老师是不是？
对，他已经开了博物馆。
英国是不是已经有博物馆？
有一个博物馆，在四川有一个博物馆，在成都。哎，博物馆里面也有大量的道教文物，有几千件吧。
我们说是你的那个博物馆，你开的自己的私人博物馆。高老师有没有可以跟我们简单的这个说一说？专门也会我会建议，我们理事会，在未来的这个下半年或者是明年的时候，来专门的有这样的同样的这种介绍，就是说目前还在进行的计划，或许你可以留到那个时候讲。不过你可以先给我们一个简单的这个 preview， 先给我们个我们讲的是预演吧，有没有多少？高老师。
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think there's really a lot going on in terms of projects and also publications. There are several large collections. There are recent reprint collections that our CRTA project, which I briefly mentioned before, is now trying to chart and map, right? But there are also new collections that are being compiled now and that will hopefully come out soon. And this would be a very good topic for a Global Taoist Forum special session discussion. I mean, not only talking about what is new and what kind of material is there, but also talking about the intellectual stakes of choosing and editing these collections, and how do we go about using them and devise research question around them. And if we do one such special session of the Taoist Forum, I would be very happy to use a few minutes to talk about CRTA and what's the specific contribution of this open access. It's a Wikipedia, basically. It's a Wikipedia description of all of those texts, and it's ongoing and it's collaborative, right? So it's already have several hundred entries available there, but it's new ones are being created every day. It's an ongoing project. The idea is to provide a map of this literature, and as new collections of material come out and are published, and also libraries keep putting online lots of very important materials for our research. We try to keep track of that through CRTA, but there are other ways of keeping track and describing and making this literature available, because as several of us have said before, it's not just the few of us who really work on later period Taoism, and we basically know about these things and we know to read them more or less. But the idea is to make them available to a wider audience. I mean, lots of people who do, Yushin said that earlier. I mean, social history, intellectual history, cultural history. This is important stuff for them, but they don't know it yet. Right? Right. So we have to make this text available for them. You have to map this literature for them. We have to describe them, guide them to how to read them.
And if you hold it in Paris, I think that would also help making the great impact as well. In person in Paris, right? Yeah.
Paris or in Oslo. There are other places than Paris in France which are appropriate for nice conferences like this.
I think on that note, we have to unfortunately end this wonderful session. I want to thank again all the speakers, all the participants, it's so exciting to see this happen, and to also see us really interested in expanding beyond the small circle of Taoist studies scholars. And so I want to thank Professor Lai for really spearheading this project to the end of, to the completion of the Chinese edition. I'm very happy to hear that you're already working on the English edition, which is wonderful, wonderful news. And I want to thank everybody else, all the editors that are here and maybe haven't had a chance to speak. We know the work that you have put in this, and all other collaborators. So hopefully we'll have another session on similar topics soon. And let's keep in touch.
I just want to break up to say, I want to thank Tobias who come to our rescue and set everything up. and he's the grandmaster that makes all of us, play here. So thank you, Tobias, for setting it up. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.